Local News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to thank you for tuning into the 4 o'clock News and Politics Hour. Just had former Mayor Joe Paolino in to give us an update on the Case Mead Lofts just across the street from the studio here. But as we do every Tuesday, usually, check in with Jennifer Lawless down at American University about everything that's happening inside the Beltway, and there's plenty to talk about today. Jennifer, thanks for Skyping in.
My pleasure.
So one of the big stories, we can't discount it, it's pretty much the tops in the news everywhere, is the situation with Rob Porter in the White House. Who knew what and when? Now we learned today that the FBI has said that they told the White House about these allegations against Porter regarding domestic violence in his marriages before he was in the office. And it's in opposition to what we've been hearing from the administration. Does John Kelly's job hang in the balance?
I think there's no question. And it's not only that the White House knew, but new reporting today came out that Porter was actually up for a promotion. So not only did the White House know that information, but it wasn't going to keep them from allowing him to expand his portfolio and take on some issue domains beyond just being social secretary in general. So it's a major problem for John Kelly for two reasons. First, he was the one that was supposed to bring order and discipline to the White House, and this demonstrates that there was an information flow problem at best. The second reason it's a problem is because if there's not an information flow problem, then he's completely adopted the Donald Trump view of the world when it comes to women and when it comes to defending the men who abuse them. And this White House cannot have a president and a chief of staff who have a woman problem. The other thing I would note here that's really important and probably would be the reason for Kelly's dismissal is the manner in which he's handled it. So not handling Porter is one thing, but potentially lying to the press, maybe lying to the president, lying to the staff around him suggests that it's pretty difficult to come back from that. We've seen that with other people who have been dismissed from the White House.
And we've seen the reaction from the president following the revelation of these allegations, including some pretty damning evidence and pictures. The president continues to stand behind Rob Porter and not even mention anything pertaining to the situation. Do you think he'll address this at some point and acknowledge that now that we know the FBI knew that this was there?
No, because Donald Trump doubles down. I mean, this is somebody who not only defended Porter, but that's the second one, right? There's also Sorensen, who abused a wife, who not only defended Porter, but in the face of photographic evidence and a black eye, defended Porter. So this is not somebody who apologizes, who says that something was handled wrong, who backs down. He's not going to do that. I think the best that we can get is what we've already seen from Sarah Sanders, where she said, look, this person is no longer employed in the White House. What else do you people want? And that's pretty much the extent to which the White House makes apologies. So, the good news is, no, he's not employed in the White House anymore. The bad news is that, domestic violence was not taken seriously. And it's also bad news for Republicans who are running, especially in swing districts. They now have to distance themselves to the president, and we know that Donald Trump is retaliatory.
And, here was a very, very bad week for the White House. There's no two ways about it. But let's talk, he'd had a kind of State of the Union bump, if you will. Is all that sort of goodwill lost when it's the latest sort of press mishap for this administration?
Yes. Now, I mean, he did get this bump, but if this wouldn't have happened, it's likely that when he went out and said that the Democrats may have, in fact, committed treason by not standing and clapping for him, that could have been the story of the week. So, we're in a time right now where it's always something. And no, the State of the Union didn't get as much attention as we would have expected. But by the same token, neither did his comments suggesting that the Democrats are un-American or disloyal.
And so speaking of the president, big news reported in Politico yesterday, his proposal in the budget for cost savings to replace food stamps with food boxes, America's Harvest. Talk with us a little bit what the talk inside the Beltway has been about that.
Yeah, so apparently Donald Trump is going to be the new Blue Apron service for food stamp recipients. It's completely insane, and it's insane on a couple of levels, as people have noted. First of all, it's completely unwieldy to think that you're going to cut this program's budget by about 25 or 30% and then take 50% of the allocated money and provide a door-to-door delivery service is just off the top bonkers. Beyond that, this is a president and this is an administration that believes we already have too much government, we already have too much bureaucracy. You're now actually telling people specifically what they can eat. It just sort of flies in the face of everything that this administration supports. And then beyond that, it's not going to fly with Republicans because there's a farm bill that needs to get out that actually provides protection to a lot of Republican districts in a lot of agricultural states whose products now wouldn't necessarily be included in these little food boxes. And so, I understand that Donald Trump is saying, oh, we're going to really supplement and we're really going to, highlight American-made goods and, and foods, but I think it's a lot easier said than done. My prediction is this goes nowhere, and it actually provides the Democrats with a pretty good talking point. I mean, if this is not sort of Big Brother, I don't know what is.
So it's kind of one of the first instances we oftentimes hear things from the president that are his proposals, sort of his policies, but to come from within the administration itself. I mean, do we think this was top down or bottom up or some kind of combination of both?
I mean, it's probably both. And I also think that it's a result of what happens when you have agencies that are hardly staffed, right? Like you get crazy ideas and there aren't enough people at the table to say, wait a minute, were you kidding? And then that actually becomes a legitimate proposal. I do not envision this delivery service taking place.
Okay, so let's go on from these America's Harvest boxes. Talk a little bit about his budget. It seems let's talk about the deficit and where it could or could not actually go.
I mean, the budget is kind of crazy because it adds about $1 trillion to the deficit in the first year and about $7 trillion to the deficit over 10 years. And remember, this is a president and these are Republicans who have prided themselves on cutting the deficit. Moreover, it is shoring up defense spending at the expense of everything else. I mean, the entitlement program cuts are pretty substantial, but even the infrastructure investment isn't anywhere near what the congressional Republicans and Democrats said would be required to actually provide a boost to U.S. infrastructure. So, it just seems like it's completely out of whack, not only with what the American people need, but even what congressional Republicans and Democrats have prioritized as vital.
So are we seeing then, do we think that is infrastructure really going to end up in the big loss column for 2018?
Well, it's not necessarily going to end up in that column. We have time, and what we've seen is a White House that's constantly willing to revise and resubmit, right? They're like, oh, this isn't popular, we'll give you executive order number 2 or 3 or 4. We saw that with the travel ban. We've seen multiple iterations of Obamacare replace and repeal. We've seen that with the tax bill. So, I don't think this is going to be the last word on infrastructure, but this should have been an easy issue for the administration. Especially given that Democrats and Republicans in Congress put forward a version that they were willing to agree to. So the president is just tone deaf, not only when it comes to Democrats, but even to the legislative branch of government more broadly.
So let's talk about POTUS. We've got a few more minutes here to chat about all things politics. Let's talk about your reaction, the reaction inside the Beltway to the official portrait unveilings of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama.
And they're really different. Right. And so historically, I think it's really important, given that it's Black History Month as well, that you have for the first time 2 African-American artists providing these portraits of the first African-American president and his wife. But I mean, when you compare them to any other portrait, they're really quite different. And, the Obama portrait itself is so bright and so vibrant and so stunning and so sort of nuanced and symbolic and complex. That, it's obviously there are going to be people that love it or that hate it. But I do think that, the people that they chose to do these portraits and the manner in which they wanted themselves to be portrayed is consistent with the kind of administration that they conducted over the course of 8 years. So, they're not milquetoast portraits, though, so it's not that surprising that you have a large portion of people saying, wait a minute, this doesn't seem that presidential. Yeah. I personally like them.
They are. There's been a lot written and talked about since their reveal, and that tends to be that they're quite unlike any other presidential portrait. And it was interesting to see the portraits, and now they're there. But while we have you here, I have to ask you about Kansas. How is it in 2018 they have not addressed the issue of qualifications for running for governor in Kansas, that we see 6 teenagers running for the office and they have just turned down a dog owner who tried to get their dog to run? 2018.
So as somebody who's, really focused on and has written a lot about why people don't run for office and why it's so important that young people do run for office, this is particularly interesting to me. So with the exception of federal offices, the U.S. Constitution does not provide any kind of requirement for what it takes to be an office holder, right? So it's up to the states to determine the qualifications for state and all local offices. Most of the time, the people seeking these offices want to hold these positions of power and aren't trying to make a point or make a political statement per se. When the teenagers decided that they could get onto the ballot, this guy in Kansas decided that his dog was at least as qualified, and I think that will certainly the Board of Elections there did rule the dog unqualified, and said that I guess maybe you need to be a human being. Maybe that's just a given. But, I think it does speak to this broader issue, actually, of election reform. And the idea that, especially if we're concerned about outside forces potentially affecting our elections, so many of these decisions and so much of the machinery and the technology is housed at the local level. Some of these localities and even states don't have laws for who gets to run or not, let alone how to count votes or how to deal with recounts. We saw that in Virginia, where a recount that ended up in a tie was then resolved with a flipping of a coin. And so, given that this is so important right now and election integrity is so important, maybe we can use the craziness in Kansas to signal that we might need some kind of national effort to make sure that we've got the right kinds of people qualified to run.
Well, again, Kansas making the headlines for all the wrong reasons. It looks like they're trying to put forth legislation to put at that state level a minimum age. I mean, does this loophole exist in other states? So do we expect other states to follow suit?
Well, I think the question becomes, states don't really fix problems unless they emerge, right? So, I mean, if the loophole exists in other states, but people haven't taken advantage of the loophole, then they don't necessarily have the incentive to do anything about it. Now, they might clean it up just because of this situation, but, generally speaking in politics, if it's not broken, it's not fixed.
Well, I say kudos to these teenagers, telling their teachers, sorry that my homework's late, I was out on the campaign trail. I mean, I just, kids will get out of work in all the darndest ways. Jennifer Lawless, I appreciate your taking the time to Skype in. I look forward to chatting with you next week.
My pleasure.
Okay, take care. Bye. Jennifer Lawless down at American University, as we do most every Tuesday. Get the sense of what's going on inside the Beltway. Plenty to talk about today. We're going to go a little more local here. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guest at the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center.